Bitch, where's my money? If you want to help me out, you can subscribe to me on Patreon, which is Breadtube, on Subscribestar, which is Grim-Jim, or if you want to make a one-off donation to help support me and keep the channel going, you can do so at paypal.me/JDesborough. Thanks. Hello, lovelies. If you're outside the United Kingdom and you're looking at the news coming out of Britain, then, like a lot of Brits, you're probably staring at it and going, what the fuck? I will try to explain concisely, or as concisely as possible. To figure out what's gone wrong in the UK, we really need to go back to the Brexit vote. And it goes back longer, but that's a convenient starting point. Brexit was our Trump moment. Not Boris Johnson per se, but the Brexit vote. A non-binding vote, might I add, so utterly distorted by propaganda and criminality that if it had been a binding vote, it would have been overturned by the High Court, and you can find records of that online. It was a massive constitutional change that, in most sane countries, requires a supermajority, typically of 60% of the vote. It was an enormous act of self-harm enacted upon all of us by the Tory party, purely in an attempt to quell their own internal divisions over Europe. Those internal divisions, well, they cut across a lot of topics, but it's basically a divide between patronising, aristocratic, noblesse oblige types and utterly sociopathic evil within the Tory party. Evil that somehow manages to make Thatcher the Milk Snatcher look like a relatively reasonable human being, said as someone who lived through that horrible witch. So, how did that go for David Cameron? He fucked it and resigned, leaving the mess behind him and the Tory party now firmly in the slavering jaws of the rabid sociopaths. Theresa May was a sort of compromise candidate looking to salvage some modicum of sanity from Brexit and to minimise the damage, but that attempt that she made to do that was slowly eaten away from within by the swivel-eyed lunatics until she was brought down after an especially disastrous election attempting to shore up her majority. That didn't go too well, largely because the Remain parties were getting organised and she was seen by her own side as being weak on the topic of Brexit. So her attempt to find and salvage some sort of halfway decent path on Brexit, well, she fucked it. In comes bouncing baby Boris with his entirely affected goss chaps Tim Nice but dim boosterism, fake populism and unfilled promise, shocking, I know, for a Tory, to redistribute some of the wealth in England from London and its surrounds in the home counties to the north and the regions. It was bullshit, of course, but you combine that with the populist bullshit and our ferociously right-wing tabloid media going all out in their reprehensible smearing of Jeremy Corbyn, an imperfect but at least sincere politician, but all that basically cut the legs out from under the Labour Party, who refused to cooperate with anyone else, which is another big problem, and that ended up with Boris getting a stonking majority in Parliament, where nothing would really stand in his way. Not in the country, of course. They only got 44% of the vote in the country, but despite that, they ended up with something like an 80-seat majority in Parliament, essentially unassailable. Technically, there's 650 seats in total in Parliament, but a bunch are non-functional. Sinn Féin don't take their seats because they'd have to swear loyalty to the Queen as was, or the King as is, and being a Republican party that wants to reunite Ireland, they can't do that. Plus, there's various officials like the Speaker and their deputies who don't vote, so it lopsides things a bit. Basically, our system's fucked. So, Boris waffles about having got Brexit done as it all rapidly falls to pieces around his ears. Fortunately for Boris, if not for the rest of us, along comes COVID and Vladimir Putin to the rescue, whose effects on the global and British economy managed to obfuscate and hide exactly just how much damage Brexit had done, and how empty the promises that had been made to northern racists by the party and the media had been. Of course, Bojo was slow to act on COVID as well, and then had a bunch of parties in defiance of his own rules. There was a lot of sleaze, a lot of pay for play, all the usual kind of horrors that the Tories get up to, but they're usually a bit more stealthy about it. Boris was a bit too obvious and open about what he'd been doing. And, you know, a bunch of people having lost grandparents or other relatives due to COVID were understandably miffed, which is apoplexia for Britain, that Boris had flouted his own rules, had all the parties, had wine parties in number 10 while everyone else was self-isolating and everything. And as a result, the Tory party began to hemorrhage support, largely due to his antics. It was this, not the massive amounts of deaths, the collapsing economy, the crops rotting in the fields because we didn't have enough immigrants to pick them. No, it was that lack of popularity, or that downturn in popularity, that is the only unforgivable sin to the Tory party. So eventually, they ousted Boris. So, Boris fucked it as well. But what do you do after Boris? In any sane world, you put the country into a safe pair of boring hands, leave them in charge as like a caretaker while you reorganise and sort things out. That would probably have been Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, who is inappropriately fondly remembered for doling out money during lockdown, so he's quite popular with the general public. He's not particularly popular within the Tory party or within the Tory party members, because they somehow think an immensely wealthy conservative accountant is somehow a socialist or something because circumstances forced him to hand out money. I don't know what other option they think there was, but hey ho. So Rishi couldn't get the kind of support that he needed to become leader, especially once the vote went to the membership of the party, who are even more swivel-eyed and sociopathic than the parliamentary party itself. I mean, Rishi, relatively speaking, he might be a safe pair of hands, but he's a fan of austerity, which killed over 300,000 people last time it was enacted, and that was before long COVID and the gas and oil crises, and before such economics were roundly debunked by reality. He's the favourite now that Truss is out, but we have to talk about Truss. Oh yeah, Liz Truss, she super fucked it. She made all these previous fuck-ups look amateurish. She took the job of Prime Minister and steward of the country and gave it a good old pegging with that bladed sex toy from the film Seven. Truss belongs to the most sociopathic part of the most sociopathic wing of the most sociopathic party in mainstream British politics. Her, and a few others of this extreme, including our very short-lived Chancellor under her, Kwasi Kwarteng, they wrote a book together, apparently on circles of paper in edible crayon, laying out their plans for a sort of Singapore-on-Thames to unleash the power of the market, a low-regulation, libertarian paradise for oligarchs and money launderers, even more than we already are that, and basically that's what our economy is now. It took only a few days in office, having already finished off the Queen, for her to really, utterly fuck it. Her and Kwasi had a mini budget, which, when push came to shove, even the most arch-capitalist international money markets seemed to recognise was pie-in-the-sky libertarian economics that just aren't a goer. So in a desperate attempt to repair that damage, we were out maybe 50 billion pounds out of the economy, spunked up the wall for nothing. The pound fell to close parity with the dollar, which hasn't happened in a very long time, and then Liz's attempts to defend her policy and her actions and to explain it were just a a bizarre series of stalling, brain-buffering interviews and atrocious performances in Parliament during Prime Minister's Questions time. So, she tanked the Conservative popularity even worse than Boris did, and as we already covered, that's the only unforgivable sin in the Conservative Party. So 44 or 45 days later, depending who you ask and how they're counting, of chaos, the Tories rallied round and shoved her out of power again. Not that they care about the country or the money or anything, it's just the polling numbers. So Liz is out and it's all fucked, worse than before. So now we have yet another fight to be leader of the Conservative Party. But now there's so many factions, so many hurt feelings, so many people that have fallen out with each other, it seems to me like an impossible task for them to even form a functioning government. Rishi's ahead with support in Parliament, so maybe we'll get someone who is at least boring, but also someone who seems hell-bent on neglect killing a few more 100,000 pensioners, job seekers, disabled people and other marginalised types, using economics as discredited in their own way as Trussonomics. But wait, there's more fuckery. Bojo has flown back to London to see if he can be made leader again, having been ousted for breaking his own rules, corruption and all manner of other problems. I would like to think that this is the kind of fuckery that even the endlessly polite and stoic UK public will not stand for. Some wag on Twitter described the prospect of Boris coming back into leadership as like trying to stuff a turd back into your own arse. But this is Hellworld, so who the fuck knows? I wouldn't be surprised if they made Pinochet's ghost a leader at this point. Why aren't we having an election? Well, as I think we've amply covered, our system is fucked. There is no way to force an election without the ruling party agreeing to one. And with their poll numbers so low, it would essentially be suicide and end of career for most Tory MPs at this point. So it's not in their personal interest for them to call an election. It's in their personal interest to cling to power as long as possible in the vain hope that people will forget and that their polling numbers will improve and that whatever sociopath they get into power next time at least has the good sense to keep stum for a while. But the numbers probably will go up. And they probably will get better before an election is forced. I don't think they'll recover completely, but they'll recover a lot because people are thick as mince and have the memory of a goldfish on bath salts. Will they ever put the country first? You're having a bobble, mate. So yeah, if you were curious, that's a potted recent history of every which way in which the UK is fucked. Zang.
In the grim, dark depths of a grim, dark mine, there's a grim, dark man with a grim, dark mind, and his grim, dark pen spends its grim, dark time scratching grim, dark tales for his grim, dark kind.